I'm Wortham-Galvin, and I direct the Resilient Urban Design Program here at the Clemson Design Center. Right now, you are on a Clemson campus, right? That's where we are. If you have been here before to interact with our students in any form, can you raise your hand? Right, look around the room. It's quite a few people. I say that because what I'm going to be talking about is what and how we teach. And one of the core elements that we have is professional engagement. This is obviously the reality that our students are having to deal with, right? This is their career. It's many of our career too, but really this is their career. This is where they're going to have to lead over their lifetime. And so we have to teach students how to deal with this. And for us, it's understanding that complex web of the material assets that already exist, the new ones that we need to add, but also protecting public space and making sure we still have a place for that, and engaging in social and environmental equity issues. These are all things that we ask our students to grapple with. This was a sort of key moment. This program's only 5 years old. This was a key moment in this program in 2019, if everyone can kind of access their pre-pandemic brain, that we had the Dutch Dialogues here in Charleston. And we were really pleased, really if you look at those pictures on the far right column, you might recognize the brick, right? To help co-host and facilitate the coming together of local and international professionals and stakeholders to talk about how to deal with water, right? What is it that we're going to do? So one of our fundamental aspects of this program is to be a part of the conversation of what's happening now in the city. We want our students to be an active part. They're not passively learning in classrooms. They have to be an active part of what is being discussed by all of you in this room. So about 2 years after the Dutch Dialogues, this is the city. Mark Wilbur, for those of you who know him, had coffee with me, and he said, look, we're going through this 3x3x3 process. He said, but it has certain confines and boundaries around it. We want to know sort of the broader conversation. And so MRUD, which is the acronym we use for our program, agreed to do a parallel study, right? That we were going to look at how to deal with water on the peninsula in parallel with the 3x3x process that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was doing at the behest of Mark in the city, just to be able to have a broader conversation. So you'll see on this map, we divided the peninsula up into 7 segments, different students studying different portions of the peninsula in order to do this. And when I say we, what I really want to acknowledge is the amazing professional faculty we have. Aaron Stevens, who you're going to hear from next, was one of the key leads on this project, as well as Alan Davis, for those of you who know him, who's now decamped to North Carolina, was also one of our key faculty, as well as myself. So know that this was a collaboration, and in particular, highlighting the hard work that the students do in order to learn and engage. One of our foundations is that we are both community-based and research-based. I'm showing you this picture even though it's technically at the end of the process, because if I showed you all of the community and professional and stakeholder engagements, it would either be pictures of Zooms or lots of masks. Remember, this is 2021, the height of Omicron, right? That's when we started this process. So I'm showing you a picture at the end when we finally were all vaccinated and could be mask-free. But I show it again to say that this is not, again, them not sitting isolated in a classroom. They're constantly engaging stakeholders and professionals throughout the entire process. And that the entire process is research-based. We always start with case studies, no matter what the project is. In this case, we asked them to look at global case studies about best practices, about how urban areas are dealing with flooding. Maybe even in some cases less than best practices, right? But to understand what's going on. As a cohort, they studied 21 different places. One of our pedagogies is just because you study it doesn't mean you own it. And as we go through, I have 2 students that I'm focusing on, and their complete work are the work that's out on the wall, so that you can look at it at the end. I'm going to flip to Courtney, because she is showing you the actual posters that individual students made. So when I say we do it collectively, you know, an individual might do the research on a few places, but then we share it collectively so that then they can look back and see which of these case studies is going to most influence where they are on the peninsula, right? In Courtney's case, the South Bay Sponge San Francisco project, Lagos, Nigeria, Hamburg, Germany, and Bridgeport, Connecticut, were the research that she kind of founded her particular work on. And then you can see as we move through, I always have this up here, which tells you which part of the peninsula that particular student is focused on. All right, here's the other thing that is foundational for us, again, no matter the project that they're learning, which is they have to do research in the physical, ecological, and cultural contexts. They have to start there, and they have to treat all 3 equal in terms of their importance and relevance to whatever is going to happen next. So for this portion, I'm not really presenting their findings, I'm more presenting the process. I'm going to get more into what they believe based on this process. But you can see, and here's again student number 2, Courtney, right? They're looking at the physical, cultural, and the ecological, but they bring their own lens to it, and they also, as they share this information, figure out what is most important to them. So for Courtney, right, who's on the Upper Neck on the Cooper River side, she became really interested in dredging considerations, engineered watersheds, tidal datums, the flora and fauna, right? Those were the things that she took from the collective research that really propelled her forward. You can also tell that at the core, we want students to visualize their research. Making that manifest beyond just a written narrative is really important to their work. Okay, so now I want to talk about what these 2 students have actually proposed as a way to show the type of work that we do. They started doing the research in January. I should also say that this is not linear, it's cyclical. They are constantly doing research as they move forward, and they're constantly engaged with professionals and community stakeholders as they move forward, sharing their ideas and getting feedback on that. But by February, they've done enough research that Erin had them do a conceptual board for how to deal with the perimeter of the entire peninsula. All right, to really look at the water's edge over the entire peninsula, just to get a handle on the research that they've been doing, both at a high level, but also in terms of understanding Charleston itself. So I'm going to read from Ray Bird's, this is his work. I'm going to read what he wrote about this work. This is his. His conceptual idea is called the Blue Line, and his work is in that outer wall down the hall, if you want to look at it later. The Blue Line is a multi-concept proposal that seeks to integrate blue infrastructure around the peninsula. This new infrastructure will be able to combat rising seas and storm surges through a nature-inspired design approach. In addition to flood walls and levees, this proposal will include nature-inspired topologies that will provide flood control, as well as amenity to recreation areas. Under this proposal, the port will be expanded and raised to account for rising sea levels. A system of flood walls will also be installed. One of the biggest challenges is creating infrastructure that can hold back water while allowing for boating and public access. My typology includes a canal system on the western side of the peninsula to accommodate boating. All right, now I'm going to show you Courtney's conceptual idea, again, for the whole peninsula, and then after this, I'm really going to get into each project fairly deeply. Courtney called her conceptual idea for the peninsula adaptive memorials. That poster is literally sort of on the other side of this wall if you want to check that out. And this is what she had to say about how to deal with water along the peninsula edge. This reinterpretation of a wall incorporates the historic narrative of Charleston in a way that pushes us to consider how the past influences the future. Adaptive Memorials explores how the past can be respected and honored while also understanding the necessity of change. Time is experienced visually as people pass through different series of spaces. Here, the impacts of climate change are reflected upon and opportunity is provided for adaptation. A continuous boardwalk encompasses the peninsula, transforming the wall into a recreational amenity. 3 typologies are situated along the boardwalk: park, preserve, and exhibit. And this image here is park, and this is exhibit, and this is preserve. These are all sections at the water's edge. She says, the park typology encourages physical interaction with the water. So she's talking about this. And creates a new recreational amenity currently missing from the peninsula. It should be implemented where there is currently no marsh and long stretches of shallows. And she's going to talk about this. Utilized in places such as the aquarium, the exhibit typology encourages an educational experience and puts you below the surface of the water. Now, it's this. In places along the peninsula where there is still healthy marsh, the preserve typology highlights this natural resource with a passive park experience. All right, so this was they started in January with some research. This is February. This is July. So between February and July is when they're cycling through professional and community feedback, doing additional research studies in nature-based design solutions, as well as urban typologies, so they can produce a more developed project proposal. And this is his final presentation that you can see on the wall. But all of the students, no matter where they were on the peninsula, are dealing with multiple scales of the physical, ecological, and the cultural. All right, I'm going to again read, this is Ray, the blue line, I'm going to read his words. The goal of the blue line is to incorporate a healthy balance of natural and artificial ways of mitigating storm surge and sea level rise while creating pedestrian-centric developments. In addition to the revitalization of Rosemont, 2 new communities will be built, Holly and Magnolia. These communities will have reliable access to public transportation as well as new nature-based amenities to experience. Design in all communities will prioritize pedestrian, bike, and transit networks to increase mobility options. The new or revitalized neighborhoods will include resilient design strategies such as rain gardens, bioswales, green roofs, and green walls. These strategies will be crucial in the management and usage of water. Buildings will either be elevated, the wrong thing, which you can kind of see here, or include elevated access points while rethinking the ground level. Both hard and softscape public places are featured throughout the design, creating a better system for the environment, as well as for current and future residents. The main focus of the perimeter protection system is a 15-foot high elevated dune. And he's talking about this right here. Inspired by Barrier Island sand dunes. The elevated dune features a pedestrian path and a bike lane in addition to mixed-use buildings. Other nature-inspired design practices include a coral network system, which will allow marsh to migrate into the landscape, and tidal pools, which you can see down here, which will help retain water and reduce subsidence. Tidal pools and the coral network become a place of recreation and learning, while the marsh boardwalks transform the connection between people and ecology. Ray used a fairly conventional approach to zoning and really did overlays onto it. So for instance, he took the sort of city's zoning, obviously applied it to his design. These areas that you see that are kind of this peachy beige color is a new zone that he's added as an overlay, and those are conservation overlays that he's adding into it. He also wanted to make sure there were overlays that were form-based codes, building heights, but he wanted to expand it to be ecologically sensitive. So in other words, form-based codes, right, are often how the building meets the sidewalk meets the street, and those relationships and the massing and how tall they are. For him, he wanted to make sure it included how the building meets the ground plane, right, which is not as often showing up in form-based codes. How the building meets the ground plane, right, when we need to elevate and when we don't, was really important to him, as well as including in form-based codes resiliency requirements. so that nature-based solutions become part of this overlay zoning district. The other thing that all of our students do is design streets. In fact, we find the street section a place where the imaging of the ecological and the physical and the cultural, right, come together. You can often see those systems. I'm not going to say as much about Ray's street sections because I'm going to focus more on Courtney's in terms of content. But know that in some ways we find, as master plans, right? The plan is often the controlling document to many, but for us, we really find it in the section because that's where you understand the relationships between the natural and the physical and human manifest itself. All right, obviously, given where he is along the Ashley River in the Upper Neck, that he's dealing with environmental cleanup, had to study industrial pollution. He also really studied the flora and fauna from his research. He focused on Charleston Waterkeeper reports that particular estuary habitat supports 250 species of bird, 570 species of fish, and 67 mammals. Right? These are things that are not normally talked about in urban design schools, particularly those that reside in schools of architecture. But this is something that's really important to us, that they do that research and they see how they're going to create and design those places that include places for that ecology. We asked them to really look specifically at landscape strategies. So, right, you see here, this is an image of his, tidal gate, right, trying to understand how to manage water, to enter the marsh at high tide and replenish the ecosystem, while still holding back the water if we have a major weather event. Some of these images are showing this issue of what happens on the ground plane, when do we elevate, but also how do we connect buildings at levels above the ground plane for when we need to have that to happen. And how do we understand when to smartly use softscape, landscape, and hardscape, right? That we're not just going to pave paradise, we're going to try and figure out deliberately the relationships between those two. And again, more of these kits of parts, right, that he's using green roofs, rain gardens, green walls, bioswales, that we have them study and develop some typologies that then they can deploy in relationships throughout their plans. And here's, again, the ones that I've kind of talked about before, right, the elevated dune, the tidal pool, the coral network, and the marsh boardwalk is really key components that he's studying. So let's move to the Cooper River side of the Upper Neck and look at Courtney's project, Courtney Wolf. Again, her stuff is on the other side of this wall, another deep study of the relationship between the physical, the ecological, and the cultural. So let me speak Courtney's own words about this particular project, and actually the title of it, it's called Temporal Adaptations, a Framework for Resilient Growth. In this vision for the Upper Peninsula, new development is implemented in tandem with nature-based systems and policy reform. Again, you don't hear many schools of architecture talking about that, but we do. Resiliency is built into the new urban fabric, adapting over time and mirroring the surrounding and changing landscape. The design goals for this proposal are to address multiple flooding issues, not just storm surge, leverage the transitional period in the area and plan for future development, make time, change, and adaptation tangible and visible to the community, and tie together past, present, and future. She says, this project pushes the community to consider how the past has influenced the present, and therefore how the present can be molded to positively impact the future. Strategies for achieving this include all new development is implemented in tandem with resiliency and landscape strategies, a full zoning restructuring that revolves around a new ecologically based code, and I'm going to show that to you, and investing in two-way community outreach, both to receive feedback and to educate best practices. So, when she's looking at the cultural, right, this issue of education, outreach, and support, it's manifesting in several ways. She designed and developed an app interface, but she's also developing physical spaces. This is her proposal for a salt marsh discovery boardwalk. So in other words, she's making sure that you're creating places for people to be that engage in this type of education and outreach, but that you're also providing digital interfaces as well. Also on the cultural, she did a lot of demographic study of who currently lives there. If you look at these infographics, the dark part of the circle represents what is happening in the upper neck right there, demographically, and the light gray is what's happening in Charleston itself. This shows you the difference between, this is people of color, so who's living in the neighborhood, versus Charleston in general. This is single mothers with kids, who's living in that area, versus Charleston in general. The next one is poverty, right? The one after that is bachelor's degrees, right? Area versus Charleston in general. Here you have car ownership down here, and access to the internet. Right, these things become really important to her because part of her particular proposal included the development of a community land trust that you see her articulating here, as well as to incentivize private developers by including height bonuses for those who are making their buildings taller for affordable housing and workforce housing, right? That you would get to build higher if you have a certain percentage of your housing stock dedicated to affordable and workforce housing. Streetscapes. So she made her own definition of complete streets, that she felt like you need streets for people, streets for transit, and streets for water. And you have to layer those various systems. And when you look at her work outside on the wall, when you see these little icons, this represents streets for water, streets for transit, streets for people. So she highlights what she's doing in the design that sort of relates to those things. Every new street incorporates, since we're here about sort of more the nature-based, I'll focus on that. Every new street incorporates water storage and filtration throughout planted channels, stormwater medians, and biofiltration curb extensions. So to see some of those here, right, you see stormwater median here, you see some of these planted channels happening here. Safety and accessibility during extreme water conditions have also been at the forefront of the design. This has been achieved through raising building elevations, elevating roads, and incorporating bridges and other pedestrian dock systems. She's also dealing with brownfields on her site. For her, she took a deep dive into phytoremediation as a way, that's what this sequence is sort of showing you, to stimulate marsh migration. And this is the issue of time, right? She's looking over time. This is existing. This is what she believes 30 years from now that we can get with marsh migration, and this is 60 years from now. So you can see the marsh elements, right, that she's trying to help propose and stimulate, also acknowledging that sea level rise is happening during that time. The three main ways in which she wanted to deal with water: slow, filter, and store. For slow, both velocity and peak flood levels are reduced by using natural and artificial forms to buffer incoming water. Living breakwaters reduce the effects of storm surge by absorbing wave energy while also restoring marine habitats. Dredge spoils are reused, reducing the drowning of marsh and lengthening the shallows. New development at the water's edge is built to withstand storm surge and buffer the city from behind. For filter, fostering the marsh ecosystem is the most widespread strategy. Smaller scale interventions such as biofiltration systems in the streetscape should be incorporated into design. Community education about proper use of our water system is also critical. The marsh is celebrated as a part of the urban fabric, and room is provided for marsh migration. And then for store, water is prevented from entering the stormwater system through detention, retention, and infiltration. To determine which strategy to employ, special consideration should be given to the water table height and the soil type. So like Ray, she had, and the other students, she had a series of landscape strategy typologies that she articulated and then deployed in various places throughout her plan, right? From living breakwaters to dredge spoils, wet flood proofing, stormwater medians, right? They're all there. She also, whereas Ray deployed, I'm going to take zoning and do overlay districts, right? This conservation overlay district to sort of make this happen. She proposed her own rethinking of zoning altogether, right? So this would be existing zoning. This is proposed. Her colors mean preserve open space, reserve open space, protected growth, infill, retro, and managed growth. By focusing on upcoming land use, which is what she means by this, these are her words, it's impossible to fully consider the future impacts of development. This proposal aims to implement a life cycle approach to zoning, which has the ability to adapt over time. By understanding that Charleston is within a changing landscape, zoning can enable responsible steward of that land. And instead of using zones, she used the term sectors, and her sectors relate to ground elevation, level of urbanization, future land use, and upcoming use. And I won't, this is right, one of the most wonkiest things one of my design students has ever done, right? So there's not a lot of images. But she studied it in detail, and if you're really interested, we have copies of this report where she's like, she's got preserve open space, protected growth, intended growth, the different types on this. Then down here, she's giving you street typologies and special elements, building typologies, ecological considerations, right? She's really mapped out how this thing should work. All right, this is July. Based on when the city's response to the 3x3x3 report, right, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers report, we did our review early in July to support Mark because he wanted to see this and have this conversation before he wrote the report. We had about 40 people come, various stakeholders, and that earlier picture I showed you at the beginning of the presentation, right, included former councilperson Jackson and Mayor Tecklenburg, right? But we also had folks from the community of Rosemont, right? Many of you may know Herbert Maybank. Like we had a good diversity of people here just to have the conversation. And that's part of our pedagogy too. We want to have these conversations. And we like to think that potentially we played a small part in slowing this process down to be deliberate and thoughtfully considered, because what is happening now is Charleston's water plan. And we hope that by doing that parallel study to a real project, we were able to sort of maybe inform the ability to, hey, let's have a community conversation about this. In addition, the students obviously got quite an amazing professional education in the process. So I'm going to leave it right there.